So hello again, my name is Brian Geary. I'm Director of Communications at Pearson College, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with David Pinel. David is joining us from our home in Courtenay, and he's actually a year 12, I believe it is. Dave, is that correct?
Yeah, you
alumni
nailed
at Pearson. Good thing I have access to records and that type of thing.
Oh, you saw my IB grades?
I don't have that great an access to. So no alumni should worry that I'm spying on your grades. Don't worry about that. Anyway, thanks for joining us today, Dave. And now I want to speak to you about a project, an initiative that I read in a Indigenous community newspaper, Haas Shalitsa, I believe it's pronounced, or something close to it. Is the
Shiltsa.
Shiltsa.
And I am myself mispronouncing it. My understanding is that that translates to good news, the good news. So.
And this definitely is good news. But before we get to the specifics of what inspired me to give you a call, why don't you just remind us, tell us a little bit about when you were at Pearson, what your experience was like, and whether or not it positively influenced you. And I hope that's a leading question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So such a formative period for me as per the design. So I was a student year 12, 85 to 87. I was from the greater Ottawa area, one of the students from Ontario at the time. And my 2 years were in Japan House, and Brian helped me learn the new name of Japan House. So I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, yeah. And I'd have to look it up again because I haven't been on campus that much lately.
Okay.
So
there
while
you
you're
go.
talking, I'll get that for you.
Fair enough. But for anybody older than recently, and all of us who are relearning it, I was in Japan House with Theo and Eileen Dombrowski, who remain very close friends because they're still here on Vancouver Island, where I continued to call home after the college.
Techie House, Teki. Again, in the Senchotan language.
Yeah.
I'm probably mispronouncing it, unfortunately.
Techie House, right.
So, and just as a quick aside, it's wonderful the way that these new house names are introduced early in the academic year, and students have just absolutely embraced them. It's not as if the former names never existed, but they are very, very pleased to be able to honor the land and honor the local First Nation with those names. Anyway, I'm sorry, that's a bit of an aside. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, and it's topical, right? It's so we're all adjusting, right? When I was a student at the college, reconciliation wasn't even a word or concept or objective that was on our tongues, right? We were doing what we could around relationships with what seemed to make sense at the time in the context of the day, and it was never adequate, always insufficient, and it remains insufficient. So it's really exciting to see what's underway. And I guess if I was to position my time at Pearson, and you gave the leading question of was it positive, I and I joked about my IB grades. I spent as much time as I could on the water, outside, and active, and I guess had the privilege of getting away with the academics adequately to then get into the university program, the arts and science program at McMaster University, and combined honors with cultural anthropology and onward. So I did what I needed to for what I had in mind for further studies, while also being underwater, on the water, around the water, 4 or 5 days, or a part of 4 or 5 days of every week, with sea kayaking, canoeing, sailing, powerboating, diving, expeditions, adventures. And we mentioned the Chianu First Nation, and at the time we were interacting with them as the Betcher Bay Indian Reserve. And we had at the time it was called the Social Service. I think it's morphed into community service and other things. But in one of my years, I was involved, a small group of us, doing I think we called it the junior, something like the Junior C program or something. But we were every weekend taking the van to go to the Betcher Bay Reserve, to have some of the young Chianu students join us back at the college to do water safety in the pool, get out sailing and power boating, get out to race rocks, get introduced to some of how we were interacting with the marine area and marine ecology through diving and otherwise, much like a Boys and Girls Club type program. And I couldn't have told you then that I'd be doing what I'm up to today through my work with North Island College and adventure guiding, adventure guide training, and sustainable tourism, cross-cultural tourism, and the Indigenous ecotourism training program partnership, or let alone with West Coast Expeditions. So
Well, I really appreciate you mentioning that students had a relationship with Gano, and it's true that they were better known as the Betcher Bay Band, and now it's Gano First Nation is the way that we refer to the community. But there's been a relationship between a college and Gano for some years, in fact, some decades, based on what you're saying. And we'll again sort of touch on that a little bit later. But that's excellent context. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was on the water, and never became a marine biologist or a cultural anthropologist. However, those lenses and those experiences continue to inform the relationships that are front and center of my everyday.
Mm-hmm. And Dave, you're still on the water for all intents and purposes, aren't you?
Yeah.
Tell us what you've been doing for the last little while with West Coast Expeditions, and you touched upon it with North Island College.
Yeah. So with West Coast Expeditions, it's a sea kayak tour operation that's been well, this is our 50th anniversary, Brian. I'm 53, so I clearly didn't start the company. However, I've worked with the founding owner and his nephew, who became a partner and took over the company, and another colleague who ran it briefly before he passed away. And then we purchased the company in 2008. My wife, Caroline Fisher, and I, together with a local Cayuga Checklisset woman named Bev Michelle. And so the West Coast Expeditions is, we operate on pretty much only on the northwest coast of Vancouver Island in Cayuga Checklisset territory. And we've been on the same wilderness retreat base camp site as a springboard for our probably 75% of what we do. We've been on that same site since the late 70s.
Wow.
And we've been on that site at the recommendation of the local First Nation back when Jerry Lang started the company. And so we've had this long relationship in the territory with the community, and through the legacy of owners, very close relationships with the community. So I first started working with West Coast Expeditions, actually organizing some partner trips through Ocean River Sports in Victoria, another local company that was part of my inroad to the kayaking world. And we partnered with West Coast Expeditions for some trips in '95 that I helped with. And then I started working full-time as of 1996 with West Coast Expeditions. And at that time, I was also back at University of Guelph doing a master's in rural planning and development with a focus on remote Indigenous communities and community-based tourism planning, which was my thesis project in the Cayuga area. In 97, 98, completed the thesis, and the people from that time period, when I was doing my interviews and focus group meetings and kitchen meetings on community-based tourism planning and refining a process model, those people are still part of my life and part of the story with West Coast Expeditions, as well as an evolving ecotourism plan for the nation and for the area.
And you know, we talk a lot about the global impact of Pearson alumni, but it's really important to see that there is a quote, a regional impact as well on the part of Pearson alumni who are making a difference in Indigenous communities right here on Vancouver Island.
For me, Brian, when I was at, I guess it was in my master's degree at University of Guelph. It was in rural planning and development. We had the option of being in the Canadian stream or the international stream. And I left Pearson and through my undergrad time at McMaster was very focused on, I'll be working internationally. I'll be, you know, that's pursuing that. And I spent a lot of time looking at models for participatory community development and um, development in regions that were experiencing high destabilization and other things. But however, when I transitioned, well, actually during my time at Ocean River Sports, I became very aware of palpable tensions, almost, you know, in some cases with conflict in these coastal communities where kayakers and other recreationalists were interacting in Indigenous territory and really moving through it, leaving little benefit and not going into it sort of with a provincial crown land public space mentality as opposed to a historic context. And I thought, well, geez, there's something more that can happen in this conversation and needs to be understood, and how to work with communities to see if they want to, or ways that they can be more at the helm of those conversations. And it's not a linear conversation. It's not quick. It's not so here I am 20, 25, 27 years into it, and seeing incredible traction in a number of communities, and it's still not linear. It's not pretty. However, we're seeing big differences. So I chose to stay Canadian focused in my efforts through my master's degree. And interestingly, another task I have today is to comment on a draft proposal for some work through North Island College for some potential work with 6 Caribbean nations to work on ecotourism curriculum in their context in a green economy, et cetera. So I might be going more internationally in the near future, having, I guess, cut my teeth a little bit more domestically and with the Indigenous relations.
Well, there's definitely no time limit on, you know, whenever you want to go international. Now, just as an aside, we'll mention you're an instructor at North Island College as well, and North Island College has a number of campuses in the northern part of in North Island communities as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we've got campuses, Port Alberni, Comox Valley, Campbell River, and the newly renamed Mihalaquila campus in Port Hardy at the north end, and then a few outposts and programs that we do regionally without a campus. So involved with adventure guiding and an Indigenous ecotourism training program that's been a big part of my last 6 or 7 years with the Indigenous ecotourism training and working with over 80 students from over 30 different nations on the coast. And that continues to inspire and inform and yeah, never a dull moment, I guess is the phrase.
Well, let's get to one of those definitely not dull moments, and it's related to the story I wrote in an Indigenous community online publication. And it's about how the local First Nation actually has acquired the West Coast expeditions. And they're looking at it on a number of levels as an economic development opportunity, as environmental protection opportunity, but also looking at it as a reconciliation opportunity. And Canadians now are talking a lot about reconciliation, and we're seeing action on sometimes government levels, sometimes individual levels, sometimes business levels. But talk to us about what this initiative is from your perspective.
Oh my gosh. So in some ways it's been 25 years in the making, right? I've seen, as owners of West Coast Expeditions, I've seen ourselves, well, very invested in it, and also maybe placekeepers for the what next. The Cayuga-Checklisit Nation were part of the Manulth Treaty with 4 other coastal nations, more down in the Barkley Sound, Ucluelet area on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And that took effect in April of 2011. So we're 11 years into the treaty and 14 years into us having owned West Coast Expeditions. And as part of the treaty, the site where we've had our base camp on Spring Island became recognized as treaty settlement land. It was no longer Crown land as a commercial recreation site. And because of the history of our relationships with the nation, there was no question, as far as I had heard, no question about us continuing to operate on that site, and the community interactions and benefits and ways that local services are employed, and people from the community interact with our guests on Spring Island. I never saw myself as an entrepreneur, right? I sort of came into it unintentionally, but here I am, and I guess the advice to an entrepreneur is always enter it with an exit strategy, and I didn't have a clear exit strategy. However, the most obvious one, and the dream, as it were, was that one day the Cayuga Checklisut First Nation would want to own the company and would be moving it forward into whatever, however they saw that in their territory. And it's right now happening. So a month ago, the nation acquired West Coast Expeditions, and this has been a conversation that's been happening in different ways for 5 years or longer. And with the disruption of COVID, timing wasn't good for us or the sector or the nation to go through that transition. And we were fortunately able to have recover adequately last season. It was early June last year that we even learned we could operate for the summer. We didn't operate the summer before. The nation had closed all of their territory to visitors, and we didn't question that. And we certainly didn't want to be a vector of for the pandemic into the community. It was an obvious decision to make, and one that we made with easy consultation with the nation. Last summer, though, we were able to open and had a very successful, a compact season, but opened. And through that, we were able to move the conversation forward about the Cayuga Checklisut's desire to acquire West Coast Expeditions and boost what they're doing in tourism to become much more ecotourism focused, including with their sport fishing lodge, which wasn't able to be open the last 2 years, and they're reopening it in a new model this year. And they, through their sport fishing lodge, also want to move beyond just fishing. So acquiring West Coast Expeditions, it's a very different product and a very different client base. However, it's now in their suite of businesses. And for the coming year, my wife and I are consultants to the nation, running the season.
For a smooth transition.
Smooth transition. We've got intent that will be renewed, and part of the transition relies on us also tapering. So we do need to step back. Otherwise, we've not built that capacity in the community. So that's part of this summer. And our business partner, who I mentioned, Bev Michelle, through the time that she was a business partner, she had variable availability to actually be on the ground with the business these last few years, while raising her own family and caring for her elderly mother and other family members. But she's now stepping into a management role with the company as an employee through the nation now that they own it. So all three of us are involved for this season and onward. And in 4 days, I go out to Spring Island to ramp up our season, and in and out, and off we go. But it's a very active part of reconciliation in my mind and in the nation's mind, for them to have that autonomy on their treaty settlement land, in their territory, for more opportunity for their people.
Well, I think the term that I saw in the story, it was a progressive localizing of the operations of West Coast Expeditions. And I thought that was a really good-hearted way of putting it, in the sense that obviously you've worked together with individuals and the nation itself, to bring that expertise and that knowledge. And you've also learned from them. And in that way, it also allows for greater local operation and knowledge to be used in running the expedition company.
Absolutely. It's a neat phrase, and it captures it. And it builds on that sense of authenticity about how it's happening, where it's happening, who's involved, and it may in 2, 3, 4 years still do some of what we've been doing with the sea kayak experiences. However, the hope is we've also integrated more enhance what we're doing in terms of cultural interactions and experiences, and using the base camp platform for a range of things that are part of their vision, building on the history, and then moving towards I guess there's the practical, hey, what's the market after, right? What are people going to pay for and want? How do they want to experience, as well as what feels right for us to be sharing as a nation, for the Cayuga-Checkoslet nation in our territory, I think is the conversation. In the last year, Brian, a lot of other pieces have come together in their economic development planning and mechanisms to support business development across aquaculture ventures, forestry ventures, and then more broadly in tourism and some other even business supports for small business who entrepreneurs who aren't running businesses necessarily owned by the nation, but who are members of the nation and doing their own thing. So what's exciting for me is in this transition, I'm also now have been invited to the management team for the group of businesses. And every 2 weeks, I'm now having a conversation and learning about what's going on in forestry, aquaculture, other tourism ventures, and they're wanting to make sure that those efforts aren't in conflict with what West Coast Expeditions is also doing, and that we'll be tying that into our staff training and what our guests also learn about.
That's quite an honor for you as an individual to be
It's
invited
super cool.
into that table.
Yeah. And so it's got very positive integrated approaches, right, to how all of these businesses support culture and sustainability and that localizing, right?
And one of the things that intrigued me about this scenario is that, I saw some alignment between what the college itself, what Pearson is doing, and its work with the Gano First Nation and with partners, Habitat Acquisition Trust and the District of Metchosin. Gano is part of the Tumuk Treaty Settlement Organization, which is negotiating with the federal and provincial governments for a land settlement. And the college has offered, I believe it's 34 hectares that could be part of a proposed Indigenous protected area. And in some sense, Gano has a vision somewhat akin to what you're saying that the KCFN nation has as well, in terms of low impact economic development, opportunities for employment for citizens of the community, and also in our case, opportunities for education for the young people of the community. And as Chief Russ Chips of Gano said, we want people to come home to the community. Gano is a small community. Many of their members are scattered around British Columbia and across Canada. And they want to provide better homes and economic opportunities for more of their community. So there are a lot of similarities in that sense. And we talked earlier about this, and we talked about, how ROI, return on investment, doesn't always necessarily have to have a dollar sign in front of it, but we can measure that, and we should measure that in many ways in terms of economic development, educational opportunities, community building, and those kinds of things. And I think the project that you've been involved in, or the initiative, the business that you've been involved in, is very much in that vein.
Yeah, I hope so, right? And I think we've got that shared hope. All of the conversations, where it would typically be negotiations around the acquisition of a company, it's been, there's some things we had to work through and obviously go through the lawyers, talking with lawyers, and make sure that the T's are crossed and so on in the process. However, it's been very all parties have been excited. In the signing ceremony that we had last month, the chief administrator officer made a point of sharing with us as now former owners, that when this was brought from the Economic Development Committee for the Holding Board of Businesses to the executive of the legislature, that with almost no discussion, it was unanimously supported that the nation acquire West Coast Expeditions and build on the relationship. It's not as far as we've heard, it's not been a controversial decision. It will have understandable concern about, oh, what's the nation going to do with it? Will it be successful? What next? How will, you know, different people from the community be involved? What will be the opportunity? And that's full circle to your example with Chianu. Well, even this weekend, as part of preparing the camp for our first school groups that are arriving in early June, Bev, who's now managing things, has organized a work party of 10 people from the community to go out to the camp and start, you know, trimming back the grass in the meadow, clearing driftwood, assessing safety of trails, and sort of that first wave of preparing camp. And a lot of those people are doing so as part of working off volunteer hours to clear debts to the nation,
Right.
through their own circumstance. So it's a complete win-win, where they're able to do something on the land, in the territory, identifying with the company, supporting the business while supporting themselves, and clearing those debts. And a lot of them have been longtime friends and supporters of the company. And so it's, though there's not a financial transaction in it, it will be a meaningful start to them engaging with West Coast Expeditions this summer and onward.
I like the way you brought that in a circular fashion back to the community benefit. I really appreciate that.
It's capacity building for youth. It's reducing the leakages from the community. So Bev, as manager, she lives there, right? And she's integrated with a deep family and other connections. And so her earnings are hers in the community, and as is everyone else who's hired as part of it. And we're doing a good job in the transition if less of the money associated with this business is traveling out to staff elsewhere and providers elsewhere. And they're both will be needed for a period of time. And nobody's saying that this must be only hiring members of the nation. That's not an immediate realistic expectation on anyone, because there are so many things happening in the community, like Chianu, with building more opportunities for people to live at home, right? And so it's creating more of an economic base that allows more people to live there.
And I'm just going to stop you, Dave, because Zoom is telling me I've got less than 60 seconds here. So if there's something that you have in 10 seconds that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about, please do.
I'll just say thank you. Every time I think about this and interact, it helps me realize different layers. And for us, it's reconciliation and action. And I've cautiously asked our advisors from Cayucit, do they consider this reconciliation? And they say, absolutely, right? I don't want to be co-opting that term as somebody not from the community.
Thank you. Dave Pinel from your home in the Comox Valley. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.